Well, the albums are starting to come in that have been recorded over the whole lockdown of last year and this year, and I'm pretty excited to see what kind of musical expressions we've had within this kind of forced creative exile or isolation for everybody. And Big Big Train is a pretty big hitter, so we're expecting some good things, right?
'Cause these are the strangest times. You better believe these are the strangest.
Common Ground by Big Big Train. So, for those of you not in the know about Big Big Train, Big Big Train is one of the bigger, I guess, UK kind of retro progressive rock band. For me, they kind of straddle the monikers of like a retro prog and a modern prog. They do incorporate a number of items within a modern prog expression, employing a lot of different expressions and techniques, pushing the music forward in that kind of a sense. You know, they have a very clear sound that is very unique to them that doesn't necessarily latch on to the sounds from the 70s, but in that same breath, they are still utilizing a lot of that same techniques and the same expressions from the 70s, like longer stretches of sound, big symphonic movements. And I mean, that's not, inherently a retro prog thing, but like bands like Yes and Genesis and more in the Canterbury scene, it's very ingrained in that kind of a style of expression. So Big Big Train has actually had a very long history, getting their start in the mid-90s for Goodbye to the Age of Steam and kind of noodling around from there. I came onto the scene probably with everybody else in 2009 with the Underfell Yard. That was the one that really broke them into this progressive rock movement. So they put out 5 albums before that, but really it was the Underfell Yard that really skyrocketed them into the public progressive rock eye. From there, I fell in love with their next 2 releases of English Electrics Part 1 and 2 that then come together as the Full Electric. And I still believe to this day that the Full Electric is their best work. I think it's the most realized. It really like staples in what Big Big Train is, their expression, and I always felt like from there they were just kind of recapturing that essence that they had kind of unearthed. And also the albums have been kind of hit and miss. Like Folklore was good. I really like it. I thought that it was on that same kind of level, that same kind of par. Grimspound was starting to shake a little bit. Wasn't too much of a fan of that one. Second Brightest Star was definitely a letdown, being that it was released the same year as Grimspound was. I felt like it was a B-side. It was just leftover tracks that really didn't do anything. But I was very excited and very relieved when they put out Grand Tour. I love some of the songs that were on Grand Tour. It was big again. It had that same kind of revitalization of energies. We come to Common Ground, their album that they released this year. There's a little bit of a shakeup. There's a little bit of a transition period between the Grand Tour and this one, being that they've kind of consolidated some of their members. 2 members have unfortunately left the band. Dave Gregory is unfortunately no longer with the band, and same with Danny Manners. Danny and Dave have been left, so that just leaves David Longden on the lead vocals, Gregory Swanson? Yeah, I can never get Gregory's last name. Bass and as well as vocals. I mean, all the people sing in this one, which is great. Rickard Solblom, who you may remember as the lead driving force for Beardfish, one of my favorite progressive rock bands. He joined the band a couple of years ago, actually. This is, I think, his 4th or 5th album with the boys here, as well as Nick DeVirgilo. So Nick, you might know from bands like Spock's Beard. He was the drummer for them for the longest time until he left, I think, between X and Brief Nocturnes, and those are some of my favorite expressions of theirs. So Gregory was really the starter. He was kind of like the main focal point, brought on David as like the lead vocals, and I mean, as with any progressive rock band, their list of players and cast of characters, it goes on for a while. You know, people coming and going and what we've got now. So, I mean, they went from being, a 7-piece band from their last album with, like, almost 20 people accredited as, like, featuring, down to 4 individuals as, like, a ensemble with cast. So the makeup of the band has definitely changed. And on one sense, this doesn't feel different. Like, if you were to listen to the Grand Tour and Common Ground back to back, it feels very similar. The two have that same Big Big Train expression. There's not a whole lot of like real differences between the two, but there's also this rejuvenizing sound that's on this. Like, the energy that's found on this album is amazing. It's bringing me back to the full electric. And so because of these kind of shifting of characters, I feel like the band is really being able to focus in on the talent that is still with the band, with Rickard, David, Gregory, and Nick. It really allows the four of them to bring out the best parts of one another. One of the things I love about this particular album is that you can tell each individual had their own idea or essence brought to the table that then everybody else grew from. So that even though each individual has like their own like writing credit, kind of like each one had their own idea or their own track on here, everybody is able to bring in their own personality to really flesh out that track, because the overall concept of Common Ground is very much that we're stronger together. I mean, it's almost like a diary entry of how everybody's been experiencing the lockdown of last year and this year of, you know, the big COVID thing. So on the one hand, it showcases this abundance of creativity that's birthed from this isolation, but also this need for community, this need to interact and be with one another that really unifies this whole human equation, this whole human expression. And I really appreciate that this was the leading cause for this album, and pretty much every song mirrors this in some way, as a good progressive rock album does, with a really strong concept behind them. So coming into the actual tracks here, coming into the nitty gritties, the album opens up with a really strong track of The Strangest Time that really, it surmises so much of the experiences that we've been experiencing for the past year and a half. The keyboard work from Rickard really feels like Elton John, and that was something that the band put almost as a driving force for this track, of like almost like a grace seal from Yellow Brick Road. And David's singing style on this really drips with brilliance. I love his smooth, both high end and low end. I think he's really an accelerator for both, but I love how soothing it is. I love how catchy it is. I do find myself, upon repeated listens, humming this is the strangest times, kind of coming back and back and back. So I really do appreciate how fun this album opens up with. You know, it opens kind of the same way of like Make Some Noise did with the Full Electric, or like how Folklore opened with the title track of Folklore. And I really do just love how driving it is. From there, we go into the second track, one of the longer ones, of All the Love We Can Give. And I could tell that this one was something that Nick came to the band with, because it does have this underlying Spock's Beard feeling to it. And this is one of the first times where, at least to my ears, Nick takes center stage for the singing, really near the mid-late part of this track. I know Nick comes in a little bit within the harmonies and takes a little bit of a center stage, but really near that end piece, it becomes this full-on Spock's Beard. Like, I'm getting stuff from like Feel the Euphoria and X and their title, like their Spock's Beard self-titled work. Like, I'm transported back to those albums and that expression that Nick brought to the band at that point. And I was loving it. Like, at first it felt very out of place, because it took me out of the Big Big Train experience and plopped me into the Spock's Beard experience. But after some repeated listens, it reminded me that this band, even though David is the lead vocalist, all four of the now prominent band members have taken up the center stage of singing at one point in their career. Nick with Spock's Beard, Rickard with Beard Fish. I kind of like that, Spock's Beard Fish. And Gregory with a lot of his other bands. It really kind of led the stage that the common ground really is we're stronger together, and we're stronger when everybody shares the load. From there, we go into a Black with Ink, and I love how hard-hitting this one is. This one's a lot more of a rocker tune, and this one does feel like a little bit of an older track as well. And I believe that this was a track that they had originally written for the English Electric sessions that didn't really quite feel right for those. And this does kind of lend its hand to when you're in isolation and you've kind of run into a creative slump because you're just not being all that inspired. You do tend to look back at unfinished projects, because now they have a whole of a lot more time. This is a great time to really see them to the finish line. And I feel like Black with Ink does that very, very well. It feels a lot more polished. It feels a lot more realized, and it fits very well within the overall flow of this. And then from there, we come to the last track for the first half of this with Dandelion Clock. And I love that this one's almost a look back from where you are currently, and how the simplest things can be the kind of markers of time. And I love this kind of juxtaposition between Black with Ink and Dandelion Clock, where Black with Ink was a very powerful, very emotive, and very like strong track in a energetic sense, whereas Dandelion Clock does that same thing but in a very subdued and humbling text. And it really showcases that some of the best ways to ground yourself into uncertain times is either returning back to those rituals that you had as a kid, or just getting yourself back to nature and, you know, planting your roots back into the earth. So I like that this is the track that kind of ends that first half. So from there, we go on to the second half, which opens up with Headwaters, one of the instrumental pieces that actually bleeds right into the second instrumental piece of Apollo. And I love how Headwaters is really Rickard's time to shine. As I mentioned, I love Beardfish. I love Rickard Solblum. He's one of my favorite musicians working today. And his ability to take some of the ideas from tracks and really breathe new life into that is a real massive skill that he has. And I love what he's able to do with Headwaters in blending these really dark and menacing sounds with a very soothing overtone being played on the piano there, because it is, at the end of the day, just a little bit of a piano ballad, almost an interlude between the first half and the second half that then leads us right into the second half. I also love the fact that this brings forth some of the themes that will be kind of realized at the last track of Endnotes. So it does provide this kind of midway point of the album, so that it introduces some of the themes that will then get realized at the end. Then we come into Apollo. I love Apollo. I think Apollo is a great instrumental track. This is something that Spock's Beard did very, very well back in the day. This is something that even Big Big Train does very, very well. And I love these rockin', more proggy aspects of these instrumental pieces. And Apollo is so great at showcasing everybody's skills, with David playing on the flute to Gregory just giving it his all in terms of the bass guitar, and really like putting down some meaty bass lines on that then get followed up with Rickard's guitars and keyboards, and Nick on the drums really, really breathes new life into that. I'm getting flavors. Some of the masters of prog's instrumentals, like I'm thinking of Los Endos from Genesis, and it's interesting that they chose to put this kind of at the beginning of the second half rather than finishing the album off, even though I love Endnotes and I think it's a great way to end it off. I wonder if this would have felt a little bit better being at the end and then have Endnotes bleed into it, rather than have Common Ground and Atlantic Cable being the two kind of closer tracks. But yeah, Apollo is a great rockin' track, and I love the instrumental pieces on there. Then we come to the title track of Common Ground, and it's a great track. I love how it's kind of the main single off of this, and it really does tie together a lot of that experience being within the lockdown and what it really means. I love Greg's bass work on this one, and David's singing once again just shines through, both within the high tones and the lower tones. I don't think he gets enough credit for his lower tones. It provides a much more intimate soundscapes when he's singing in that styles, because it's a little bit more hushed. There's a little bit less power, which provides less of a barrier between him and the audience. But really, the one that I want to talk about is Atlantic Cable. Atlantic Cable might be my favorite track off of this, and it really is the only piece of music on this that fits the usual Big Big Train structure of talking about a historical item, like either a figure or a landmark or something like that, because all the other ones seem to be focusing in on the here and now, which kind of separates this album from a lot of the other ones. But this is the only one that really is able to bridge that gap in so many different ways of the past albums talking about a historical event and figure, as well as the current theme of Stronger Together. This is, of course, the Atlantic Cable, which connected Europe to Canada and North America. It's the connection between these two continents. It's that communication. And I love the music that's on here. It's soothing and bombastic. It's got this really soothing opening piece with the flute and the guitar work, and especially Rickard's piano work that really lays down a really soothing foundation that then gets upheavaled by the storm, because you do realize that these guys had to cross the entire Atlantic and lay down this cable that's resting on the bottom of the ocean, and they had to go through so many different storms, and those storms are helping to carry this cable across. So it comes up with so many tasty images and metaphors of connecting people and the trials and tribulations that you have to go through to do that, weathering the storms to lay down the foundation of initiating contact. But that music that's really carrying us through, the chunky guitars, the really deep bass that permeates and ebbs and flows. We go from like this really soothing atmosphere to a really bombastic footwork. And then it finally gets all crescendoed at the end within a proper progressive rock style. You wouldn't go through 15 minutes of music without having a really satisfying ending with a really grand crescendo. Atlantic Cable might be my favorite track off of the whole album. And then we end off with Endnotes, and I love Endnotes and being a very satisfying closing piece. It rounds out the album very, very well. I love the ebb and flow within this one. It really is just kind of the nice bow on the end, and I love when an album is able to end on a very crystal clear ending. So in the end, I really don't have too many negative points to talk about Common Ground. I think the only one that I would say is that it still kind of is, on some respects, textbook paint by numbers Big Big Train. They don't deviate too much in terms of their sound. There's nothing too revolutionary behind there. And at the end of the day, this is one that I love with my whole heart. I highly recommend checking it out. This is a great entry point as well for the Big Big Train discography. I think it's a great way to get into it. I think that this really does kind of solidify where the band is going to go from here. Because, it's really a huge task to continue this far into the game with so many albums behind them and still feel fresh while still sounding like themselves. So Common Ground from Big Big Train gets a huge note seal of approval. Great job, boys. I can't wait to see you guys live when you come over to North America. And that's kind of what I've got. That's all I've got for Common Ground from Big Big Train. I'm going to switch it on over to you guys. What did you guys think about this album? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Whatever you thought, let me know by commenting down below. And if you like what you see and you want to help support me, consider donating to my Patreon. I've left that link down below. Even $1 a month really does go a long way. You get your name at the end of the credits, and no matter what you donate, you will get something back as a thank you from me. So, and if you want to see more of me, I've got my podcast of Quid Prog Quo, kind of a take on the Quid Pro Quo. You can listen to that wherever you can listen to podcasts, and I also have the visuals of that on YouTube with that same name. And I've got my tabletop role-playing game YouTube, which is Notes on Tabletop Role-Playing Games. I think that's about it. That's about it. So, thank you all so much for watching. As always, you guys are definitely the best. And until next time, Notes out.